My name is Carol, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 6 years, I've devoted myself to being a homemaker. My husband, Brian, is a doctor. Although we never had children, we found contentment in each other's company. But recently, a moment that seemed to come out of nowhere shattered the life we'd built together, bringing our 10-year marriage to an abrupt end. It all started one evening when Brian came home later than usual. He looked at me, and with chilling certainty, he said, "Carol, this is it. We're done." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" I asked, confusion twisting my thoughts. Brian's response was something I couldn't begin to process. "I'm marrying my mistress. We're getting a divorce today." I was stunned. "Your mistress?" I repeated, my mind struggling to make sense of his declaration. "What are you saying?" But Brian didn't soften. He was resolute. "I've made up my mind. I'm leaving you and marrying her. Our marriage was never about love anyway, so why does it matter to you?" The truth was, our marriage had never been based on love. Brian's parents had pressured him into marrying me, and I was someone who seemed like a good match. We barely knew each other before we got married, and our union was rushed, based more on circumstance than deep affection. We managed for 7 years, but the idea that it was all falling apart so suddenly was incomprehensible. Then Brian revealed his affair with a nurse from his hospital, describing her as kind and caring, qualities he felt I lacked. He said their bond was undeniable, and he compared me, a homemaker, to her, a nurse, with brutal honesty. His judgment cut deep. "Anyone would choose her over you," he said. I could only stand there, processing his words. Finally, I found the strength to speak. "Fine, let's get a divorce," I said, my voice steady. Despite the shock, continuing a life with someone so cold-hearted seemed unbearable. I suggested we sort out the legal details, alimony, property division, and so on, but Brian interrupted with a bombshell that left me reeling. "There's no need for that," he said, his voice dismissive. "No divorce papers, nothing." I was confused. "What do you mean? Without a divorce, you can't marry her?" His words dripped with contempt. "You really are naive. We've never been married. I never filed the paperwork. We've just been living together. No marriage, no divorce, no alimony. You thought you'd get something in a divorce, but you'll get nothing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What do you mean we've never been married?" I demanded. "We've lived as husband and wife for 7 years. Brian's response was cold and calculating. He had never filed our marriage registration, choosing instead to leave things unofficial. He admitted that he had planned it this way from the start, avoiding a legal marriage because he didn't love me. "It was always just a convenience," he said. "You took care of the house while I focused on my career." His words stung like a slap to the face. The reality hit me. I had been living a lie. Brian had treated me as little more than a housekeeper, using me to maintain his life and career. "Why would you do that?" I asked, feeling utterly betrayed. His response was matter of fact. "It worked for both of us. You lived comfortably, and I had a successful career. No strings attached." The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. To make matters worse, Brian threatened to sever ties with my father's business, which had benefited from our supposed marriage. Should I ever reveal the truth? I suddenly realized the full scope of his manipulation, not just the end of our relationship, but the potential fallout for my family's livelihood. In that moment, everything I believed about my marriage crumbled. A decade of my life spent under the illusion of partnership was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated arrangement, and I was left with nothing. I had to rebuild my life from scratch, without the support I had assumed was mine, and face the bitter truth of what our marriage had really been. Brian stood there, smug and self-assured, mocking me with a cruel laugh. "It's your own fault for being so easily fooled. How pathetic, to be tossed aside with nothing," he sneered, clearly reveling in his belief that he had the upper hand. But what he didn't know was that everything was about to change. I couldn't help it. I started to laugh. His confusion was evident. "What's so funny?" he asked, clearly baffled by my sudden amusement. I looked him in the eye, a smile creeping onto my face. "I can't believe you're a doctor with such a lack of understanding," I said, the words almost tasting sweet. "I've known about your affair, and I know you never filed our marriage registration." His face froze, his arrogance slipping. "That's impossible," he stammered, disbelief flooding his voice. But I had been preparing for this moment, carefully biding my time. For the past 4 months, I'd suspected something was wrong, but I needed proof. Without confronting him directly, I hired a private investigator. The results were eye-opening. First, I received undeniable proof of his affair, photographs showing him and a nurse from his hospital entering a hotel room together. Second, and even more shocking, the investigator uncovered a crucial detail: our marriage might not even be legal. According to conversations overheard between Brian and his mistress, they believed they were in the clear regarding alimony and property division because, in their minds, our marriage had never been legally recognized. I was stunned. A decade of living together as a married couple, And he had kept me completely in the dark about the legal void we were living in. It was a truth I had never even considered. I muttered to myself in disbelief. How could he do this? But the investigator's words were a quiet reassurance. This situation is rare, but not impossible, and you're not powerless here. But what can I do if we were never legally married? I asked, feeling a wave of defeat. The investigator's response was calm, almost reassuring. That's where you're wrong. We can make him pay for his deceit. We'll move carefully, quietly, so he doesn't suspect anything. As Brian continued to smugly gloat, believing his deception had put him in control, I knew the tables had turned. I was ready to make my move. You thought I was pitiful for being kept in the dark, I said, my voice steady, but now, it's you who should be pitied. I watched as his expression faltered, the smugness slipping away. What are you talking about? He demanded. You see, even though we weren't legally married, the law still recognizes our long-term cohabitation as a valid relationship, I explained, every word laced with certainty. That means I'm entitled to alimony and a division of property, just like anyone in a marriage. The shock on his face was immediate. He had underestimated me, thinking I wouldn't be able to act without the legal marriage certificate. What he didn't realize was that the law protects people in situations like mine, long-term, committed relationships that hadn't been formalized with paperwork. His ignorance was his downfall. The investigator had laid it out clearly. Despite our lack of a formal marriage, we met the legal criteria for a common-law relationship. According to the law, as long as there was mutual intent to be married, as evidenced by our shared life and the fact that we were recognized as a couple by our family and friends, we were considered a de facto marriage. You've been living together for over 10 years, the investigator had explained. You've shared finances, household responsibilities, and have been known as a couple by your family and friends. That's all the law needs to recognize this as a marriage in the eyes of the court. At the lawyer's office, my suspicions were confirmed. I had every right to claim alimony and a division of property. When I told Brian, the smugness melted away, replaced by wide-eyed shock. He had always thought I mentioned discussing our situation with Brian's parents, and it was clear that the prospect of this terrified him. The fear of the fallout from our separation, particularly concerning his family's business ties, made him desperate to stop me. Don't call our parents, he pleaded, his voice strained, but the decision wasn't his to control anymore. Our relationship's fragile facade was crumbling, and it was time to face the consequences, regardless of his fears. Are you serious? I said, incredulous. You could have stood up to the marriage from the very beginning if you were so against it. To live selfishly in a marriage for 10 years and now fear the truth coming out is baffling. Your story doesn't add up, and I'm going to tell both of our parents what's really been happening. And so, I did. I reached out to both families, and when they heard what had really been going on, they were shocked. This led to an urgent gathering at our house, the atmosphere heavy with tension. During the meeting, the truth came out in a phone call. For 7 years, we had been living a lie, maintaining the illusion of a marriage without ever officially registering it. Brian's confession followed, and he blamed his parents for pressuring him into a marriage he never wanted. His claim was that he had felt coerced into agreeing, fearing the backlash if he had objected. His justification for this charade was as absurd as it was painful. He pointed to some story he had read online about someone who didn't officially register their marriage until they met their true love. He claimed that this was his reasoning for never making our union legal. His parents were disgusted, their frustration mounting as they heard this. The conversation turned to the vows he had taken, promising to cherish and create a happy home. They lamented how that promise had been a lie. And the betrayal wasn't just personal, it stretched beyond our marriage to affect their family's reputation and business dealings. It became clear that the fear of truth getting out had less to do with protecting me, and more with protecting their own interests. You made this situation spiral out of control with your own decisions, I said, my voice cold with the weight of everything I had endured. You were the one who threatened to sever our business relationships if the truth came out. At this accusation, Brian's face drained of color. He stammered, trying to regain control of the conversation. Wait. Hold on, let's just calm down and talk about this, he pleaded, but the tension was already too thick to ignore. My father-in-law, barely holding back his anger, confronted him directly. You thought not registering the marriage was doing yourself a favor, but all it did was hurt Carol. You were selfish. You allowed her to suffer for an entire decade. What gives you the right to put her through that? Brian stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he scrambled for words, but none came. The weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. After a long silence, my father-in-law finally spoke, his voice tinged with regret. We failed to guide you properly, and now we're all dealing with the fallout. We'll take you back to your childhood home. It's time for you to reflect on what you've done. They escorted him away, my father-in-law muttering apologies as he left. We're truly sorry for the mess this has caused, he said, a shadow of sorrow in his voice. My parents, seeing the exhaustion on my face, gently suggested, "You've been through so much, come home with us, rest for a while, don't worry about any of this right now." But despite their concern, I shook my head. "No, I need to stay here, I need to finish this." I was determined to settle everything with Brian, the lies, the manipulation, he had no idea what was coming next. I started preparing for the legal proceedings, gathering the evidence that would establish our common-law relationship and ensure I received what I was entitled to, alimony and a fair division of our assets. 2 weeks later, during a tense meeting with the lawyer about the settlement, Brian balked at the idea of splitting his wealth. "Why should I give up any of my assets?" he demanded, his frustration palpable. "I've provided everything while she stayed at home." The lawyer remained calm, trying to explain the situation. "The assets you've accumulated during your time together are subject to division. Think about it, Carol managed the household, made the meals, created a supportive environment for you while you worked. Those contributions carry value, both emotional and economic." Brian, still struggling to understand, could only stammer in response. He had never realized the full weight of what it meant to have shared a life for so long. The law didn't care about his justifications, it cared about fairness, and I was determined to make sure I received mine. Frustration and disbelief were written all over my ex-husband's face as he struggled to grasp the importance of my role as a homemaker. The lawyer, unwavering in his stance, addressed him sharply. "Your ability to work and live comfortably was directly supported by her efforts at home. Recognizing the value of household management is crucial. Your current situation stems from your own decisions, and it's unjust to disregard the sacrifices she made throughout your relationship." This confrontation was a powerful reminder of the complexities involved in ending a relationship. It underscored the need to acknowledge each partner's contributions and the importance of a fair resolution in the aftermath of separation. During the property division discussions, it was made clear that I was entitled to half of the assets, a standard procedure in such cases. But the shock didn't end there. The alimony request, set at $250,000, left Brian stunned. He hadn't expected such a high amount, particularly given the unconventional nature of our relationship. The sum was justified, not only by the years of pretense but by the sudden, callous way he had tried to dismiss me for someone new. That sum reflected the depth of his deceit. He had underestimated the significance of a decade spent under false pretenses. But the law didn't care about his regrets. The fact remained, we had lived as though we were married, and his protests meant nothing. The terms had been laid out, and he had no choice but to accept them. Things took another unexpected turn when a notice for alimony was also sent to his new partner. She, understandably, was caught off guard. Confronting Brian in a public space, where privacy was in short supply, she demanded an explanation, leading to an awkward and heated argument. Their confrontation, filled with accusations and denials, didn't just remain between the two of them. It quickly spilled over into the hospital, where their private affair became the subject of gossip among staff and patients alike. This public fallout only escalated the situation. My father, in light of the scandal, made the decision to sever professional ties with the hospital. When hospital administrators inquired whether this was related to the affair, it became evident that the rumors had already spread far and wide. The affair was no longer just a personal matter, it had become a professional liability